Good morning, class. This is me, Miss Aida Ganituen, and pag-uusapan natin today ang content ng ating Module 3 entitled Magellan's Voyage Around the World, written by Antonio Pigatheta. First, let's do a brief recap about our discussion last Monday. So last time, we have discussed what history is, its importance, and the difference between a primary and secondary source. So, what is history? We defined history last meeting as the study of the beliefs and desires, practices, and institutions of human beings. Or we defined history simply as the past of mankind. So, why do we have to study history? Here's why. An examination of the past can tell us a great deal about how we came to be who we are. So, what does it mean? It only means that looking back at the roots of modern institutions, ideas, values, and problems. So, looking at the past teaches us actually how to see the world through different eyes. Bakit? Para ma-appreciate natin yung diversity of human perceptions, beliefs, and cultures. We also discussed the difference between a primary and secondary source. So when we say primary source or primary sources, these are materials produced by people or groups directly involved in the event or topic being studied. So meaning, eyewitness sila dun sa laman ng material. On the other hand, when we say secondary sources, so these are materials or testimonies of anyone who is not an eyewitness or one who was not at the event of which he tells. So example, yung mga author na gumagamit ng ibang reference. Okay? So, isang example yun ng secondary source. Okay, let's move on to our main topic for today. Sana lahat nakaka-move on, di ba? Charot, okay. So, the following are the learning objectives of our discussion. First, to analyze the content, context, and perspective of the document. Second, discuss the Magellan Elcano expedition and experience based on the journal. And lastly, to explain the relevance of Antonio Pigatheta's account on the study of Philippine history. So, who is Antonio Pigatheta? Okay, he was born around 1490 in the town of Vicenza, Venice, Italy, and was the eldest son of Paring Giovanni Pigatheta to second wife Maring Angela Zoga. Okay. So, his biographers described him as a well-educated young man, possessing an avid curiosity of the world around him. He joined the delegation of Monsignor Francesco Chiragati when the latter was assigned as papal nuncio to Spain in 1519. So, it was during this time when Pigafetta became acquainted with the lucrative spice trade and heard the news of the voyage to be undertaken by Ferdinand Magellan. So after getting the approval of the Spanish sovereign, he left Barcelona and went to Seville. He presented his credentials to Magellan and to the Casa de la Contratación, kung saan ito yung office in charge in voyages to the New World. So na-admit siya as one of the supernumeraries coming from prominent families who will join the trip. Para saan? For the love of adventure and for the advancement of military service. Pigafetta survived the challenges and catastrophes that the expedition encountered along the way, including being wounded in the Battle of Mactan. He was among the 18 survivors who returned to Spain on September 6, 1522 aboard the Victoria with Juan Sebastian Elcano. From Seville, Pigafetta reported to His Majesty King Carlos V and gave him a handwritten account of what happened to them during the journey before returning to his native Italy. So, ito na yung book na kung saan sinulat niya yung exploration or expedition nila together with Ferdinand Magellan and Juan Sebastian Elcano. Very little is known as to what happened to him during the latter part of his life, except on some accounts that he joined the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem in its battle against the Turks, and he died sometime in 1534. Now let's proceed to the historical context of Magellan-Elcano expedition. So one of the benefits that the Europeans gained from the Crusades was the discovery of some products that were not available in their home country. These included porcelain, silk, incense, herbs, perfumes, fabrics, carpets, spices, and other oriental products. And of all these Asian products, spices became the most expensive and in-demand commodity among Europeans because of their numerous uses, such as food preservation, flavor enhancement, and even medicine. And since spices were very lucrative commodity, many merchants aspired to monopolize their supply and distribution in the European markets. Asian goods reached Europe either via the Silk Road or the Arabian-Italian trade route. Both routes were expensive and oftentimes disrupted by wars, natural calamities, and bandits. The closing of the land route of the spice trade with the conquest by the Ottoman Empire of Constantinople in 1453 forced European kingdoms to look for ways to purchase spices directly from the source. That's why they decided to explore the oceans to look for a way to the famed Spice Islands, or yung tinatawag natin ngayon na Moluccas Island. Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, put up a maritime school that trained sailors who would later discover an eastern sea route going to the Spice Islands and other islands in Southeast Asia, gamit ang Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean. So this route enabled them to trade directly with the producers of spices and other oriental goods. So it gave Portugal the benefits that made other monarchs be prompted and envious to search for a new trade route to Asia. That's why yung ginawa nilang trade route, yun yung naging way para ma-discover nila yung ibang territories na hindi pa nila alam noon. Although, meron lang mga nakatira doon and known to other races. Inspired by the success of Portugal, Spain aspired to have a fair share in the spice trade. So ang ginawa nila, they financed the transatlantic voyages of Christopher Columbus from 1492 to 1502, which resulted in the discovery of the territories on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And then decades later, the Spanish monarch also supported the plan of Ferdinand Magellan to go to the east by sailing westward, kung saan nag-refuse ang Portugal na i-finance ito. The Magellan-Elcano expedition left the port of Sanlúcar de Barrameda in Seville on August 20, 1519, with around 270 men of different nationalities. One of its main objectives was to search for a new maritime path to the Spice Islands or the Moluccas Islands na tinatawag ngayon that would not violate Spain's treaty with Portugal. Along the way, the expedition suffered natural and man-made challenges, and out of the 5 ships that left Spain, only 3 reached the Philippines. The first couple of weeks of their stay in the Philippines were marked with hospitality and cordial exchanges of goods. The local inhabitants traded with them and some were even converted to Christianity. Lapu-Lapu, the chieftain of Mactan, refused to trade with the Spaniards. And when Magellan learned this, he waged war with him. Despite their superiority in terms of arms and training, the Spaniards lost the battle, and one of the casualties was Magellan himself. When the survivors returned to Cebu, they were also treacherously attacked by their former allies. This prompted them to leave the island, and by that time, their number was just enough to man 2 ships. Okay, ang natira na lang is yung Victoria and yung Trinidad na ship nila. The expedition finally reached the Spice Islands and managed to purchase a large amount of spices before leaving. Unfortunately, the Trinidad and her crew were captured by the Portuguese on their journey back. Okay, so on September 7, 1522, Elcano and 17 survivors arrived in Spain aboard the ship Victoria. One of them was Antonio Pigatheta. So, siya yung writer ng Magellan's Voyage Around the World, kung saan ito yung ginagamit ngayon na primary source ng mga historians sa iba't ibang mundo. He was the assistant of Magellan who kept the journal that became the main source of what we know about the first encounter of the Spaniards and the Filipinos. The account of Pigafetta also enriched Philippine historiography because it contains important details about the conditions of the Visayan Islands in the 16th century. Some of the prominent leaders during that time, their economic activities, social and cultural practices, and religious beliefs were identified. Moreover, local textbook writers use his book as their source of historical information about the beginning of Christianity in the Philippines. The accounts about the first mass in the Philippines, the conversion of Raha Humabon and his wife, and the story of the image of the Santo Niño were mostly taken from Pigafetta's book. Pigafetta has numerous accounts about the reaction of the Filipinos when they met the Spaniards. Some Filipinos were easily befriended by the Spaniards, while others refused to interact and trade with them. Lapu-Lapu is the most prominent Filipino character in Pigafetta's narrative. He was the first Filipino who led the resistance movement against the Spanish rule and successfully thwarted the first attempt of the Spaniards to take control of the Philippines. So that is the summary of Magellan's Voyage Around the World written by Antonio Pigatheta. And for your quiz number 1, you are required to answer the following guide questions. Number 1, who is Antonio Pigatheta? What is his role in the Magellan-Elcano expedition? Number 2, according to Pigatheta, how did the locals of the island welcome Magellan and his crew? Third, what does Pigatheta account tell us about the conditions of the Visayan Islands in the 16th century? And lastly, based on Pigafetta's account, how did the Battle of Mactan started? So for your answers, guys, you may write down your answers in a one whole yellow pad paper and then attach po natin ito sa Google Classroom. So for any clarifications or questions, you may ask me in our group chat. And please wait for the post kung saan po kayo mag-a-attach ng mga sagot. Okay, that will be recorded as your quiz number 1. That's all, class. Thank you and happy brain flexing.